in the nose.
Sweet.
All the way through. There was no way.
Little red Chanel and some black marabou on the end of it.
Hi, I'm Gringo Pescador on Washington Lakes. Most people just call me Gringo. I'm hanging out here with Mike. It's pouring down rain and dark outside, so we got Mike behind the camera and we're in my garage here, and I'm going to tie up a couple jigs and show you guys how to do it. I've had real good luck just with simple jigs as far as steelhead goes, and so it's nothing fancy. It's just it just works. First thing you need to do is get yourself a vise. I started actually with an anvil vise that's over in the corner of my garage, and I actually cinched it up to an anvil vise and did everything by hand with no tools just to see what it was like. And it worked, so I went from there, and then from there I got a kit. It was the cheapest kit I could get, and in it I had a pair of scissors, a whip finisher for the, I don't even know what this is called, but it's for the thread. This is just a pointer. It's got a sharp end. I use it for several things, kind of a multi-tool. And then you have the little deal that pulls the thread through the thread. So, like I said, I don't know what they're called. They got names. I'm not a fly guy, so I don't know what they are. First thing you need to do is you got your vise, and you're going to secure your jig to the vise. You want the pointed side down, so your hook side is down. You secure it in the vise. There's two clamps. One secures it at the front end of the vise on this particular vise, and one secures it at the back end. This vise here cost me 30 bucks. I try to keep the point of the jig just inside the head of the vise, so there's no point here. What I've had problems in the past is with the thread actually catching that point and breaking the thread. So once you got your jig head secure in the vise, then you got to thread load your thread onto the thread holder. It's just pressure points. So you put the spool into those pressure points. You have this threader, which has thin wire loop on it that goes through a tube in the bottom, just like that. Then you run your thread through that loop and pull it on out. So there's now your thread is in this tool. Now what I use this tool for is so you're not holding onto the thread. So the first thing you want to do is you take a little bit of thread, you're going to hold it. I usually go up to the bend of the hook, so you're holding it parallel with the hook, and I'm going to grab the thread right at the base, right at the jig head, and just start spinning. And what I'm doing is wrapping the thread, and then once I get a couple wraps in, you can feel the tension, and I'm going to start wrapping the thread around itself. And I'm moving forward and wrapping over my tag end. And this is securing the thread onto the jig. And the thread actually gives the material that you're going to tie to it something to grab onto on the inside when you're wrapping the outside. So I'm going to do this. I do this right up basically to the hook. After you get the thread wrapped all the way to basically right even with where the hook point is, I'm going to take some flash. And I use flash on all my jigs. So I'm going to cut a few strands of this, and you know, it's not real scientific, it's what I get. And I'm cutting about an inch and a half worth. And there's, I don't know, maybe 10 strands there. You know, some of my jigs will have more, some will have less. What you're going to do is you're going to take the very end of the flash. You're going to hold it onto so that it overlaps where the thread is. And now what I'm going to do is I actually take the thread and I'll do a spin. I'll wind up the thread. The reason I do this is that way I can make a loose loop around, and with the thread spun, it wants to loop. So I'm making a loose loop. The reason I do that is because if you just go tight, if you do a tight loop, you're just chasing that flash around the hook shaft, and you can't get it wrapped. But if you wind that up, you make a loose loop, you snare it. So it snares tight. Now I'm going to start wrapping backwards. I'm going back towards the head of the jig. I'm going to go a little ways back. And so I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch back from the hook, the point of the hook now. And now I'm going to grab my my rabbit fur and start tying. What I use is called crosscut, and again it's from Hairline. It's just rabbit strips, hot pink. And the difference between, there's crosscut and then there's a straight cut, and the difference is in the way the rabbit fur lays, the way it's cut. So these, you can see, I wish I had some of the other to show you, but I don't. But these you can see the fur is laying down along the strip. So the strip you can kind of see on the back. The skin is horizontal and the fur's laying vertical. So what you want to do is you want to take it and figure out which end puts the fur pointing away from the head of the jig. So it's going to be pointing away from the head of the jig, just like that. I'm going to start. One thing I do too is I'll lick my fingers and kind of dampen the rabbit fur, and it gets it to behave a little bit so it's out of your way. Now I'm going to take just the very tip, the very end of the skin, and put it right where my thread ends. And I'm going to spin the bobbin again so I can make a loose loop. And I hold the end of the skin, the end of the fur onto it, and I make one loose loop around to secure it. So now I can make 2 or 3 here. Now I've got the rabbit fur attached to the jig. And from here, I'm going to wrap a few times around that end of skin, and that serves 2 purposes. It secures the fur to the jig shaft, and it also smashes it down so you don't have a big lump at the end of your jig. You have as much space between the hook and the shank as possible. Now I'm going to work the thread back towards the head of the jig, and you want to I just kind of keep a steady rhythm going, and this little hanger hangs my thread out of the way so that I can work with the rest of the material and not have to cut the line or not have to mess with the thread, I mean. So you have your thread out of the way. Now you're going to follow the fur the direction of the thread. So you're going to wrap the fur the same towards the jig head. And again, if I wet my fingers, kind of smooth out the rabbit fur, it really works a lot better. And I'm just barely, I'm not overlapping the skin from one wrap to the next. I'm just going butt up against it. And the rabbit fur, because of the way it's cut, will just lay down flat towards the hook and away from the jig head. So I just wrap until I get to the end of the shaft up against the head of the jig. Okay, now I'm at the head of the jig. What I've found works best for me is I will actually take the skin, the rabbit skin, and I'll pull it back and kind of hook it against the eye of the jig, and that keeps a nice tight wrap. Grab your thread, and I'm going to wrap the thread around that whole piece. And as you can see, I'm letting go. I'm not worrying right yet about a super tight wrap. So I wrap that 3 times, put it back in its holder, and now I need to get rid of this extra fur. I need to cut that off. So now I'm going to simply twist my vise up so I can see what I'm doing. Take my scissors, and I'm going to trim that piece off as close as I can get. So there is the rest of the fur for the next jig. Pull this down, so we're back in our original position here. Get this holder out of the way, and now you're going to do some tight wraps. And what you're doing is you're securing the end of the fur, the rabbit skin, onto the jig. I usually do enough wraps that I can't see any of that end of the skin. I have a little bump here. I'm going to wrap around it. So I've got the jig all tied up. Now I need to tie off the string. That's where the whip finisher comes into play. So with the whip finisher, you hook the thread, then you wrap the thread around the bubble, you bring your threader up on top, and you've got this triangle. And what you're doing is you're wrapping the thread that's coming off the hook is going around the shank. The thread that's coming out of the bubble is staying in one spot. So I'm wrapping the thread over itself. I give 7 or 8 wraps. Then I let go of this thread out of the bubble. Still got the thread in the hook, and I'm pulling it tight. So now you have the threads wrapped over itself and pulled tight on the shank. Take my scissors and snip off the thread. Then you have the tag end of the thread there. Now I bought this Griff's thin fly tying coat. It's some type of a glue. It smells like fingernail polish. Fingernail polish is going to work just fine. I've been tying for, well, I've tied all these. I've been tying for a few years now, and I've used about a quarter of the bottle, so this stuff will last forever. And I take, it's kind of like a giant pin. It's got a sharp end. Dip it in, so I get a drop of the glue, and I just put that on top of that tag end of the thread, and then I'll wrap it, kind of push the excess around, and that one drop is all you need. And there you have a pink jig. So it's got a little bit of flash that really shows up in the water. I like the way the rabbit fur pulses when the water hits it. When these things are floating underwater, or swimming underwater, that rabbit fur kind of pulses. And these really work well just doing a little twitch for pinks. With these 1/4 ounce jigs, last year I tied one of these up and I got 17 pinks off of it before I lost the jig. And you know, they nail it. So that's the basics on how to tie a basic jig. Then you can get into the fancy stuff. You can get into the chenelles, where you're wrapping chenille over marabou. You can add beads. Put beads over marabou. You can put lots of, put a length of rabbit fur on the end of your jig, so it just hangs off. You can add to any of the jigs that you tie, you can add a worm. You can take just a plain old worm, and what I do is you don't want it too long, so I'll take that bubble and you just hook it. So now you've got a pink jig with that pulse and a worm on the end of it. So there's, the options are endless. These are the jigs I've tied for steelheading. You have dark colors, light colors. People have their preferences for different types of water. I've got bigger presentations for dirtier water. These are 1/4 ounce with white, some UV flash, and a worm on them. I've got smaller presentations for clear, like gin clear, low water conditions. These are 1/16 ounce jigs. So you've got a much smaller presentation. I don't put any flash on these because in the gin clear water, you're going for subtle. And so you got, all different colors, all different sizes, and it's a lot of fun to get into, and it's not an expensive. If you're just tying, the biggest expense is buying the jigs. Buying the jigs. I paint my own jigs now. We might do a video on that at another time. But that's really about it.